welcome back to our afternoon session, and first up is the National Treatment Centre and a progress update from Debs. Welcome, Debs.
Thank you. Paper is relatively short and self-explanatory, so I'm just going to pull out a few highlights if that's okay.
Yeah.
So we're pretty much at the end of the contract with Balfour Beatty. We've had a slight slip in terms of when the contract will be completed, but by and large, we're managing that within the overarching commissioning programme. You'll see from the paper that we've had quite a significant result in terms of our recruitment. We are still just tipping under the 80%. I'm confident that the interviews that will be held tomorrow will take us over the 80% of staff required for the treatment centre. We've got a detailed process of transfer and mobilisation, and the planning in that has been developed to ensure that we can get the building equipped, that will have staff orientated and staff trained, so that when we open in April, staff are confident that they understand the building, the layout, and are able to safely deliver care. We're still in the technical commissioning process, and you'll see from within the report there are potential risks around the impact that if there are any failures within the technical commissioning programme that could impact in terms of our planned opening date. We do have mitigations in place, but there is a risk. You'll see that the Cabinet Secretary for Health has confirmed his availability to officially open the NTC in June of 2023. I'm pretty much happy for members to take questions, because, as I said, the paper itself is relatively short and succinct in terms of where we are with recruitment, construction and commissioning.
Yeah, thanks, Debs. And I'll open it out to colleagues who wish to ask about anything in the report. Bert.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Debs, for your input and the paper. I think there's very good progress being made. It's just a question under the heading of transfer and mobilisation in the paper, which relates to the decoupling of staff from Regmore, and plans have been established to ensure that business as usual services will not be impacted. Are you able to elaborate on what these plans are, please?
I think the reality is that question should be addressed to Catherine Sutton. So from within the mobilisation plan, there has been a structured series of meetings and discussions with colleagues across the acute services function. And in terms of the business as usual function, that's picked up within Catherine's remit.
Is Catherine with us? She was this morning.
She is.
Right. Catherine. Are you able to respond, Catherine? Perhaps we'll hold that for a moment until Catherine makes a connection, and we'll go to Alex and come back to yours, Bert.
Thanks, Boyd. Yeah, the NHS Assure thing, which has always concerned me in this process. Not so much concerned what they're going to find or what they come up with, it was the amount of time it was going to take them. Now, you're saying that you've got mitigation plans in effect. How are you going to do? I mean, if they're basically saying we've not got enough people, how are you going to solve that problem? Or what is the mitigation to make sure that the NHS Assure system has completed by the time we need them to?
Before I ask Alan to come in, because he's more of an expert in terms of NHS Assure than I am, what I can say from a project perspective is that Eric Green, who's our head of capitals in the state, has had a series of quite intense meetings with the NHS Assure team to consolidate where we are within the context of our commissioning programme with where they need to be within their Assure programme. And you're absolutely right. You know, hats off to our estates team who've managed the process amazingly well with our preferred supply chain provider and ensuring that we get all of the evidence together for NHS Assure. We have organised a meeting on site this week with both Alan Gray, who's the National Treatment Centre National SRO, and people from NHS Assure, just so that we can button down where we are and where they are in the context of the technical commissioning programme. But I'm not sure whether Alan's got further insight.
No, thanks, Alex. No, this is one of the programmes that they've been resourced for, and although it's taken them longer, I think they're up all next week to go over it. So I had a brief discussion with them and Scottish Government on Friday in regards to the process, because what they were saying is if something comes unsupportive from NHS Assure due to the fact that they've never had the time to look at anything, how can a board then not open anything, you know, that's safe, because it's a paper exercise. So it's how do you get over that one bit. So there's work going on in the background with it, but I don't think NHS Assure process, although they've put in a handover assurance step that wasn't there before, but they're allowing us to do that with our commissioning. So I think the main concern is making sure, as Deb says, is getting the commissioning all done, your water safety, your air and that. If all the results of that all come back fine, then we'll work with NHS Assure just to make sure that we cross the T's and tick the I's. But that's the key bit, because it's like any other project, until the results come back for that and that works committee, then that's when we'll know we've got a safe building. The smaller stuff we can work with them. I don't see that as an issue, Alex.
Thanks, Alan. Can we go back now to the response to Alex's question? Catherine, are you able to shed some light on the decoupling?
Yeah, absolutely. And my apologies, the technology just failed me there briefly, Boyd. Yes, so obviously the National Treatment Centre is recruiting some staff that are coming from within the Rigmore contingent, and we are very much behind supporting those staff to move in, as Deb's described, around the commissioning model. There's a lot of work for staff to understand how they work in a new environment, and given the nature of the business that's going to be delivered through that building, it's really important that that is supported. So there is a detailed programme of work which is looking at where the staff are actually moving from and what services may be impacted in terms of the recruitment process that has ongoing. To support that, obviously, there are timelines to recruitment, and we know that nursing colleagues are in short supply. However, we are doing all we can do to be out to advert, encouraging people to come to Highland, and indeed using some of the approaches that Deb has sort of spearheaded in terms of engagement for recruitment, different types of recruitment, to ensure that the message is out there that there is opportunity for employment in Highland. In addition to that, in the short term, obviously, we are looking to utilise some agency nurse staffing to bolster whilst we have a drop-off in terms of the volume of NHS Highland employed staff, and we're also working through other outsourced service providers. The funding to support all of that is being discussed through our connections with Scottish Government, who are keen to support us and to support the National Treatment Centre for obvious reasons, to get up and to get running. And working very, very closely as well, obviously, with our Associate Nurse Director for Acute Services, who's overseeing this, because there is a balance to be struck between the number of staff that are NHS Highland employed staff versus the number of staff that we take through other routes to bolster gaps in service. This is something that is an ongoing challenge for us. The National Treatment Centre obviously has made it a bigger challenge, but we always have nurses moving from different ward areas, developing their professional practice, keen to move into different areas of practice. So it's not something that's alien to us. And indeed, because of the run-in to the National Treatment Centre opening, we have had the opportunity to see this coming and to be taking action internally. So I think there's really good coordination going on between the work that Debs is spearheading and leading and the operational response to that needs to be managed on a weekly and a daily basis currently. I hope that helps answer that question.
Thank you, Catherine. Bert, did you want to follow up on that?
Yes, thanks, Catherine, for the update. Excuse me. You'll be aware from my visit last month that it was something that was being mentioned to me by a number of staff members that I met with, and when I read the report, I was interested to read what the plan was, and you've explained it's part of the ongoing recruitment and the follow-up to that, as well as in relation to bank and agency and other kind of staff members. My follow-on question to that would have been, but you've actually addressed it, is that will come with an additional cost. And how is that to be borne? But I think what you've explained is that there's ongoing discussion with government regarding that. So thank you for
that. Sarah.
Thanks. Thanks, Debs, for the update. It's getting really exciting now. It's starting to feel really real. And I'm sure with that, I would hope that it's starting to feel really real for our communities, the local communities, and the people that might be using it. So I suppose I've got a question about sort of our communication strategy more broadly. I'm hoping that we'll be using kind of announcements around the NTC in the broadest sense to kind of reaffirm, where people should go for the right kind of treatment at the right time, and how the NTC sits within our sort of suite of places that you might get help. But I actually wanted to pick up it broadly, but specifically, I'm interested to know what the comms is going to be like for the people that will be using the NTC, our first people through the door. And I recognise there's a tricky balance between you don't want to be communicating too early, but also we want to give people enough time to sort of wrap their heads. Because I suppose as a community, everybody's always gone to Rigmore, and so interested to know what we're thinking around that.
Good question. So for the patients that have been preoperatively assessed, we will be sending letters out to them within the next week to 10 days, assuming there are no delays in the commissioning programme. We're also gearing up in terms of our social media, in terms of the PR exercises around, I think, as you said, the directions. How do people get to the new treatment centre? We will be putting information on the microsite that we've had for the last 12 months to provide potential patients with information about what they can expect. So as we move towards opening, so that the level and intensity of information that we'll be pushing out through various media will be increased. We're hoping that we're going to get it more or less right, but I think what's going to be really important is that as a board, we reflect on where we could have improved post-opening, and that will go on, I think, for several weeks and months following opening of the treatment centre.
Is it okay if I come back in,
Sure,
Boyd?
sure, yes.
And I suppose the flip side of that is actually, it might sound kind of a bit silly, but I suppose it's the people that maybe wouldn't be deemed to be at the right risk level to be taken to see at the National Treatment Centre. And it's kind of, I'm thinking as well about how we explain to people why you don't get to go to the nice new shiny hospital and actually because I suppose people do tend to get excited about these things, but how do we help our communities understand that it has a very specific function?
Again, cracking questions, Sarah. I think there is some work that we need to do. I would be suggesting that our clinical director, Colin McNair, would be best placed to provide information. And again, we can use our website, we can use information on social media about the different anaesthetic risk categories for patients, and that's certainly something I'll speak to Colin about and suggest very strongly that he thinks about how he makes those communications. And just to take that forward just a wee bit further, we do have a series of what we're calling open day events that we're planning for not just ourselves as a board, the staff within Highland. We're also looking at primary care, colleagues who work within the third independent sector, partners on the campus, Scottish Ambulance Service. We'll be having a media day prior to opening. All of this is in planning. I have what I would call a framework for that build up towards opening. I'm just holding off until after we've got through this week so that we can have the discussions with NHS Assure, that we've got our ducks lined up, and I have a level of confidence in the commissioning programme, because once the letters go out to patients, pretty much as a board, we are committed to delivering care. Once we know that those, what I call critical timeline dates, are fulfilled, that's when I'll be coming back and confirming what the open day and the sort of PR plan is going to be going forward.
Thanks, Debs. Thanks, Sarah. Alex.
Yeah, thanks, but yeah, just building on what Sarah says, because this has bothered me a little bit, Debs, is managing the community's expectations. There's people out there, and I've already heard this about, oh, we're getting a new hospital, but it's the National Treatment Centre, it's not the Highland Treatment Centre, and I don't think we've done enough yet to let people know that this is part and parcel. Sorry, I'm in the dark. This is part and parcel of the national process to bring down waiting times, etc. Because a lot of people think, especially people that are waiting for orthopaedic surgery, etc., that this solves the problem. It partly does, but it doesn't completely, and that's part of this managing expectations. I think that, so the open day, etc., that you mentioned, I think that's great. I think that will help us enormously.
Thanks, Alex. I think Debs, at the meeting with the politicians last Friday, you mentioned that a couple of things that I would just want to bring out. One was that you had a week in February when you were hoping to have a lot of activity in terms of recruitment. And the other thing was that you have, as you just mentioned, a plan for various people to visit the site, and that I think the board members were going to do that around the date of the development session in March.
That's right, yeah, the 21st. So I'm just waiting to have confirmation from Ruth as to what time the board will be available. I understand from discussions with Pam it's likely to be the latter part of the afternoon. I will have the NTC staff on site in uniform and ready to welcome you to their building on that date.
Okay, and in respect of the recruitment?
The recruitment, well, that's ongoing. We have, as you can imagine, we're having discussions, particularly around soft facilities. And I think, as everyone will recognise from the local press, there's probably more sort of press interest in what soft facilities vacancies we have. Alan and I have had a discussion about this. I don't think that the risk is particularly high in terms of impacting on our ability to open. That will be ongoing. In terms of ophthalmic nursing staff, as you know, we were having to phase the ophthalmology staff because we just don't have the space within Raidmore to accommodate the additional numbers that we need for when we open the NTC. I'm pretty confident that those recruitments through the next couple of weeks will be fruitful. I'm confident on the basis of our lead nurse within the NTC, having reviewed the applicants, that we will be successful in recruiting the number that we need. If this is the case, then we will have sufficient perioperative staff within the ophthalmic specialty to open all of the ophthalmic theatres by July, which means by September, we should theoretically be able to open both services to capacity.
Yeah. Alex, is that a legacy hand? Okay. Any further questions or points for Debs? I think this will be important to take advantage of the visits by various groups, and of course the official the actual opening date of April 3rd to have a strong communications strategy around that. And, yeah. Okay, we're being asked to note the report and take moderate assurance from the information provided. I take it we're happy to do so. We are, and thank you, Debs, and we'll be very close to the opening when we next meet in at the end of March as a board.
Thank you.
Okay, can we move on now to the next item, which is the corporate risk register, and invite Boyd, my namesake, to speak to this item.
Thank you, Other Boyd, and present to board the regular paper, which is the latest position on corporate risks for NHS Highland. These have over time become aligned closer to our strategic intent, and the paper itemizes the individual risks and gives some note on most of them on the level of risk as assessed. The risks will link to governance committees and are reviewed there, and so as well as executive ownership, there is ownership within the governance committee for each. Where new risks are beginning to appear, these will be reviewed at risk management steering group and or the executive director group, so that they then mature into the format that we have now adopted. Couple of comments. One, you'll note the financial risks and that these are going to be aligned excuse me, with the 23-24 position as that comes into the new financial year. And on a general comment, there is progress on the overall risk systems. This will be submitted, we plan to submit to the audit committee in March, and to have a milestone on the developments there. So that should then come through that route up for board awareness, and we anticipate 1 or 2 board development sessions dealing with risk. And it's to be noted that the governance session we had recently does make mention of risk, and we'll align with John Brown's corporate governance documentation recently shared with the board. So with that, I think I've probably said enough, and will be quiet to allow time for questions, Chair.
Thanks, Boyd. And invite colleagues to ask questions. I noticed, Boyd, a couple of the risks didn't have a rating attached to them. 877 engagement and service design was one.
Yeah, I think that is that's a main mention of there are a couple of new risks appearing, and so they still have some processes to go through to be fully incorporated, and rather than leave them out, we put them in, but that rating will appear at the next iteration because they'll have been through the relevant groups and processes by them. Oh, his chair dropped off. Oh. If Chair's not there, I think Chair may have fallen out of the call. I'm not going to take over as Chair, but if I just take the questions while we wait other Boyd's return, I'll take Alistair first.
Yes, thank you. I really like the way this report's laid out. I found it really easy to follow, Boyd, and thank you for putting it down there. Just one of the risks I just want to highlight, and it's one that crops up repeatedly in just about every internal audit report that we've had during my time as the previous audit chair, which is risk 1056, which is statutory and mandatory training compliance. And I think the board should probably just, perhaps not for now, but the board should think as to what is there from good practice from other boards across Scotland as to address this, because it's something that we need to really grip and improve upon. And I appreciate it's often a time factor with people having other pressing tasks to do, but it would just be interesting to actually know what we can do to improve on this, because it would be a very good fix for so many internal audit reports if we could actually achieve this one. Thank you.
Yeah, noted, Alistair, and I think that will be heard by all members of EDG and is, if not already, be in action. Further action might well fall out from your helpful comment. Thank you. Gaynor?
Thanks, Boyd, and thanks for the paper. It's nice to see that the risks are now in alignment with our Together We Care strategy. I suppose I had a comment and then a question. My comment would be the paper that we have before us today obviously is talking about the process that we have, which is delegating those risks to our governance committee, and the governance committee taking over the scrutiny and giving assurance to the board around those risks. My comment would be is I don't think we have a very good formal way of doing that at the board at the moment, and I would welcome your comments on how we could do that better. Because obviously they're looking at also the mitigation, and that's something that we would hope would be quite dynamic in some cases, and would be changing and as the risk changes. And my question is, now that we have these new risks coming on board or reframed in line with our strategy, I just wondered how then they relate to our risk appetite, which you brought to the board last year, and is that going to be refreshed in line with the strategy, or does that still sit as it is? Thank you.
Thanks. On the first one, and possibly the second as well, I think the question is a good one, and one that deserves time and more than just my view. And I think it would be a good matter for the next development session that covers risk, that we think about that, exactly that element process. I think your question will be captured in the minute, and Ruth and co will take it away for us to bring that back to then. The same in terms of the risk appetite, I've recently reviewed it. I think it still applies. It's a very generic statement that is, as risk appetite statements should be, an enabling statement to allow, rather than to stifle through risk aversion. It allows appropriate risk to be tolerated to allow things to change and to progress. And again, I would expect that will be brought into at the next session, development session. We will achieve, I hope, a consensus that we can then take that statement forward to a formal paper and adopt it, hopefully in the first half of this year. And that was actually in my spiel to report to board, but you've reminded me it's the one bit I didn't read out, so thank you. Bert.
Thank you, Boyd. My comments, I suppose, really are in relation to the statutory and mandatory training compliance, which we've already heard today has been rated as a risk for a long time, and the organisation is committed to try and reduce that risk. On my recent visits last month, I spoke to staff who brought up this very subject about statutory and mandatory training compliance, and their comment was in relation to the lack of flexibility that is offered in relation to allowing people to attend statutory and mandatory training compliance. And this comment actually came from managers in Nairn, who highlighted a specific issue where they have, if I recall correctly, 16 members of staff waiting to have the same piece of training. And the request was made for the training to be delivered locally to avoid 16 members of staff having to travel to Nairn. That request was refused. I was also told that it's not confined to people from Nairn having to travel to Inverness or wherever the training is done, but there are people coming from all over the area. There had also been a request made for cascade training to take place, or a train the trainer approach, and again this had been denied. Now, I don't know what the bigger picture is in all of this, and there will be a number of component parts that affects all of this. And I guess it's not for you to try and specifically address this, but it's something that I think, having been raised, does deserve a degree of consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Bert. And I think that these comments will be noted, and we'll need relevant people to look at these. It touches on what Alistair said as well. What are the further enablers, or what are the accidental blocks? There may be good reason, for instance, accreditation of training of the trainer status or something like that. There could be explanations, but without knowing the specific details, I think the key really ask is that we unblock any blocks, identify any blocks, and also look outside of the health board area to see what other solutions have been used elsewhere that we might realistically adopt in our very widespread geographic patch. So thanks for that. I've got Graham next.
Thank you. And it's really just to add to that, this issue was raised last week at our Girl and Butte meeting, as Fiona will know, because of very similar concerns, that it's an issue across and it's probably an issue across Scotland, Boyd, I guess, given kind of system pressures. But I do think we've got to look at the flexibility of how things are delivered, and maybe that note of inflexibility in how things are delivered is maybe something that we should be giving a bit more attention to, and making it as easy as possible for the system to continue to function while we meet our requirements, not just for the sake of ticking the box, but because we know that these things are there to stop the slow erosion of standards and quality. They are actually really important, and we can forget that when we're doing the kind of the paper exercise, if you like, of the risk assessment. So I think it's something that we should return to. Like Alistair, it would be great to think that we could go a year where this wasn't being raised as a big problem.
Thank you, Graham. And I think you've underlined the previous comments, and they're well noted and will be taken away from board today. The position of board has been made very clear on this, and we will attempt to cascade that through the organisation. Louise?
Thanks, yes, and just to say I was with Bert on that visit, and I did follow up on those matters. That there is a challenge around capacity for the recruitment aspect, for the training aspect, and they are recruiting around that. But certainly in terms of the other aspects, key trainer sessions, they are available. And I think what we just need to do is make sure that the information is out there sufficiently for people to know exactly what's going on. Because I think the challenge is that a few people know what's happening and lots of people are frustrated. So let's at least tell the people that are frustrated what the true situation is and what we're doing about it, because I think that is it's the communication challenge that sometimes lets us down.
Thanks. I don't have any other hands. I note that Chairman Boyd has returned, so I might get the sack as the convener of the meeting and let him take over now.
You should just continue, Boyd. Thank you very much for taking over at very short notice, as I had to change equipment here. We've been asked to take substantial assurance of compliance with legislation, policy and board objectives, and that the risk management process is in alignment to the strategy presented to the next board meeting. And the decision is to examine and consider the evidence provided for the current risks and refer any further work the board wishes to see to the aligned governance committees. Are we happy to proceed on that basis? Yes. Okay, thank you. We move on to item 13, to the Code of Corporate Governance, and to Ruth.
Thank you, Boyd. Yep, this is the annual review of the Code of Corporate Governance, the outcome of which was endorsed by the Audit Committee in December. So this report has been prepared with some input from finance colleagues, particularly in relation to some minor changes to the fraud policy and action plan. So this year, the updates to the Code of Corporate Governance relates mainly to the terms of reference of some of your governance committees, confirmation of inclusion of the revised Code of Conduct for board members, and a revised fraud policy and action plan. It's just worth mentioning that the Staff Governance and Remuneration Committee tours will be coming to the board at the end of March, since there's been a slight hiccup in terms of sequencing, in terms of getting those revised terms of reference through the Audit Committee. So they should be going to Audit Committee in March and then back to the board at the end of March. So it's there for your agreement, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ruth. Gaynor.
Thanks, Ruth. I'm happy with that. Thank you. Just to say, we've now had a change of chair at Audit Committee, and so we'll have to change the fraud champion on page 70. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you for mentioning that. That's excellent. Thank you.
Any further points on the code? If not, we're being invited to approve and take assurance from the revisions to the code as recommended by the Audit Committee and as listed in our paper, and to note that a report will be submitted to the committee with revisions to the Staff Governance Committee terms of reference in due course, and finally to take assurance that the updated Code of Corporate Governance will be published on the board's website after the board meeting with the correction that Gaynor has intimated. We happy with that, to do that? Okay, thank you. And we move on now to item 14 under governance and other committee assurance reports, and ask chairs to escalate any issues from their various committees to the board through this mechanism. First minute is the one of the Audit Committee, and I think Gaynor, as the new chair, will speak, but she might be supplemented by Alistair.
Yes,
Gaynor.
thank you, Boyd. So I took over the chair in January. Alistair was the chair at this particular Audit Committee, but I was there also. So really just to inform committee, I've got a couple of things. We've scheduled in an audit meeting, an extra audit meeting for the 7th of February next week, and that's just to look at both the management account progress update and some of our internal audit reports prior to our March meeting, which is going to be quite full. The other thing that was raised at Audit Committee that just to make the board aware is that the Information Commission Office is currently doing an audit of NHS Highland. So I assume that's all going well, and Alistair and I both spoke to them as part of that audit, so that's currently ongoing at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Gaynard. Alistair, did you have anything to add to that? No. Okay, thank you. Any questions for Sarah? If not, we move on to the Staff Governance Committee, 11th of January meeting, and Sarah.
Thanks, Boyd. Minutes are in front of you there, but just wanted to particularly draw people's attention to, we had a really good discussion around whistleblowing, and Bert gave us a sort of a qualitative overview to complement the data that we've seen over the year, and that was really, really helpful. Had a lengthy but important discussion around the metrics that we will be seeing in the future around workforce reporting, so that was really helpful, and we had some sort of helpful representations from staff side and other members of the committee around how we might use that data for workforce planning and forecasting, so that was really interesting. And lastly, we had a really great update from medical education and the innovative work that they've been doing, so that was very welcomed by the committee. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Any questions for Sarah? If not, we'll go on to the Highland Health and Social Care Committee of the 11th of January and the new chair of that committee, Jerry.
Thank you, Boyd. The report is there for both colleagues to read. Just a few items just to draw attention to, not to escalate. Louise gave us an update on the ongoing fragility of the care home sector and care at home, and given our continued dependency on that sector, that was a really good update there. We had our first local, what we're calling district level reports at the last committee meeting. We were planning to get two a committee moving forward over the year, and they gave us a really good insight, I think, into things at a local level rather than at the partnership level overall, and I think they were well received. We're going to play about with the structure and the content so we can over time get some comparability there, but really, really well received. We had a community risk register was brought to us, an overview was brought to us for the first time. Again, that was good again, seeing that tying in with the strategic risk register that comes to the board. And we've got continuing discussions ongoing with how we actually get health improvement, public health and the prevention agenda more embedded into our work programme rather than it being specific agenda items, which we sometimes struggle for. And it's, as we were speaking about earlier, it's getting it embedded into daily practice. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jerry. Are there any questions for Jerry? If not, we can proceed to the Clinical Governance Committee of the 12th of January, and Alistair as new chair of that committee.
Yes, thank you, Boyd. There was no items to escalate, but I would draw attention to the fact that the committee was able to take up substantial assurance on the infection prevention and control report, which was presented to it, which we thank the staff for all the diligent work they had been carrying out during a time when flu was quite rife across the hospital, and indeed in meeting targets for two of the key indicators and just missing out on the third. I would encourage colleagues to look at the report and the work carried out in this area, and I think, Boyd, if we could thank the staff at the board meeting, for the work they've done to try to meet these very challenging targets. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. Happy to do that, to record that in the minutes of the meeting. Any questions for Alistair on clinical governance before we move to Area Clinical Forum and Katrina?
Thank you. Yeah, I don't really have anything much to add to the minute that's there. It was a very productive meeting, and I would thank the members of the board and the executive team that came along and added to that, and for the feedback thereafter. I think it helped. It was a fact-finding meeting, if you like, that allowed people to ask a lot of questions. There was a lot of very open discussion, which I think was very constructive. And certainly Lorraine has been involved with supporting a lot of the chairs of the constituent committees in the meantime, and will be doing so before our next meeting, and to help them hopefully come back with some thoughts and ideas for the next meeting. So, but it was a very productive afternoon.
Thank you, Katrina. Are there any points for Katrina? If not, we can move on to the Argyll and Bute IJB of 23rd November. Sarah.
Thanks, Boyd. So this one is a little bit out of date because we just had our most recent IJB last week. But just to pick up on something from the November meeting, which I think is relevant, obviously at the moment, the Argyll and Bute performance data isn't included in our NHS Highland IPQR. So for any data geeks that might be sitting on the board, that information was looked at in detail. At our November IJB, we look at our performance data there, both the monthly data for November, but also we took our annual performance report as well. So all that stuff is available if people want to read it on the website where all papers get held. And just also to note another really important annual report that came to us in the November meeting, which was our Chief Social Work Officer report. And again, if colleagues are interested, it's a report I would recommend reading if you have the time. But nothing else to note. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Anything for Sarah? No, we can move on to the final 1 minute, and that's the one of the Finance, Resources and Performance Committee, which met on the 6th of January. Alex.
Thanks, Blake. Yeah, again, minutes are there for those to read. There was nothing to really bring attention to the board. We had a long and full discussion on the financial position, as you would expect. More importantly, to get our heads around what the plan was, how we were going to be dealing with the financial situation. I think that helped. Both Elaine and Health gave us a good explanation as to what we're doing. We also had a discussion on the adult social care financial plan. Again, that all ties together. So we're going to be talking about the budget next time. And as you heard earlier on the board, the challenges that we face are there for all to see. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Are we content? Are there any questions first of all for Alex? Are we therefore content to receive these clinical governance reports? Okay, thank you. Is there any other competent business? I don't see any hands up. The next meeting is on the 28th of March, and so I'll bring this meeting to a conclusion, but I would want members to stay on for a brief briefing afterwards. So if we can conclude the formal part of the meeting, Ruth.